So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Employers Advantage June team recording. Today, we're going to discuss mental health in the workplace. I know many of you are already saying, well, May's Mental Health Month, so why are we talking about this in June? Well, that's because we understand the importance of continuing that conversation beyond just the month of May, but this is an ongoing conversation. It's an ongoing issue and something we're going to have to deal with on a regular basis. So we really want to stress the importance of it. But before we get started this morning, we would like to have a hearty welcome for our new teammate, Candace Washington. She's entering week 2 with us, so welcome, Candace, and we're excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I was just going to ask, do we clap on Zoom? Okay. What, Candace, she knows sign language, so is, yes.
And the amazing thing about Candace is she has decided single-handedly to answer all of our questions today. So everyone else can take a break. So but we're going to jump right in. Welcome to all of our other Employers Advantage teammates as well. So good morning to everyone.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And we're just going to jump right in. So let's talk about it. Mental health. People use mental health often. We hear that word so much, especially now with the pandemic and everything that's gone on over the last year and a half. But what does that really mean when we say supporting someone through mental health? And what are we talking about when we say supporting their mental health at work?
Good question. So for me, I think that means, there's a lot of things with it, but specifically at work, I think there's part of it is helping employees feel safe and secure, helping them balance, the workloads, although it's up to the employer and the manager to make sure that they're checking in with employees and talking about the workload. How are you feeling about it and that kind of thing. So a lot of it, people, because it's not, I guess, physical, it is harder for people to understand and see. So sometimes you have to associate, something physical with it for people to better understand the impacts of that. So if you just picture, an employee and you're piling stuff on their back and they're just going like this, it's the same thing, mentally. So part of it is making sure that they feel safe, secure, supported. There's healthy opportunities for open communication and that kind of stuff. So that's my answer.
No.
Ditto.
I think all of us just as human beings have a responsibility to look for warning signs for people. So whether that's in the workplace or in our personal life, looking for warning signs of an individual needing support, even if the stress isn't necessarily happening at work, it will impact work if it goes unaddressed. So just taking responsibility to look at warning signs and then take some action to support that employee or ask what support they may need.
I think oftentimes it's hard for employers to remember that people don't silo work, personal life, and things that are happening in the world. Like those are not 3 different things happening. Those are all together in the one human being, and they're processing it, collectively. And so we can't just say, well, they're not performing at work. Well, what's happening in their personal life? What are they processing in their personal life that might be contributing to their lack of performance in work? And I think oftentimes as an employer, you yourself, even as a business owner, get so focused on your own business that you forget people have lives too.
And that kind of leads me to another question. Why do you think now? So I know COVID was big, but what do you think happened specifically? What are some of the things that you think led to a greater need for mental support? Like, what are some of the things that people are dealing with that came from all of this?
Well, we're looking at
such an unusual time. We all know that. But with the social distancing and the almost closeting away of people, and they've gotten used to just being by themselves at their house with only the people that live there, that now the reemergence of the workspace things, that's hard to wrap your head around. It's a lot to get used to, you know, being independent, but now maybe back in the workplace. I think that's been hard. Folks have had to adjust their minds and do so many shifts that it's causing some emotional distress.
I think just the prolonging of a stressful time period. So, you know, this pandemic has stretched way longer than the 2-week flatten the curve, right? And so it's totally reasonable to be so solarly focused and to practice all of these social distancing and to, you know, I just need to do it 2 weeks, and then that turns into I just need to do it for a month, and then I just have to do it for a couple of months. So you have this very prolonged stressor that, you know, has only until recently started to lift a little bit. And so I think a lot of mental health issues would come from just recognizing that you did just go through something very, very stressful, and that's okay. And then having a lot of feelings about going back to work or going back to work in a physical space, or, you know, what am I going to do now for my kids? Because now, you know, I got this set up and it works really well. There are just so many pieces and parts. And over such a long amount of time, I think where a lot of these issues are probably coming from.
And folks had to work a lot harder during the pandemic in some industries to try to figure out how to stay alive with all of the changes that were out there. I had read something recently by an HR analytics group that said 72% of the people right now, employees, feel stressed in the workplace because they're burnt out from having to put in a lot of extra effort over the last year or so just to keep their businesses afloat. That's hard. That's tough.
That's a good call out.
I also think it's key to acknowledge the fact that although things have probably been exacerbated by a pandemic, a lot of this existed prior. So even when the pandemic has hopefully come and gone, or things have settled, or over the next year, people get back to the routine they had prior, this is still a thing regardless of COVID. So I think that's important to acknowledge as well.
I think if anything, it's made people, you know, we thought maybe we had coping skills before, but now we really had to dig deep and do some self-exploration to see, well, what are our coping skills individually, and figure out how do we get resources to figure out what those coping skills are. Because, you know, maybe you thought you had it down, but the pandemic totally threw you off your game. And so now you've had to, you know, figure that out in your spare time, right? If you have kids, or if your work schedule's been crazy because you are trying to stay afloat, who has time to figure out how to cope in this time, right? And so now you're floundering. And then it just continues the spiral.
Yeah, because what may have worked previously when you were dealing with maybe 1 or 2 stressors is not going to be what works when you're dealing with 10 to 12 stressors, right? And I think that's the difference between prior to pandemic and then through the pandemic. I mean, I started pulling weeds, and nobody wants to do that, but it was very satisfying and therapeutic to just go out there, and it was something I could control.
Yeah.
Right. Shannon, you brought up an interesting point, that this was something that existed prior. And so this definitely is not, you know, a new issue. Why is it important for an employer to support their employees? Why should this be an employer issue?
I think there's a lot of reasons why mental health may impact the employer. And even if it seems selfish on the employer's part, turnover is one. Someone might leave because the stress is too much. And although it could have been acknowledged and maybe addressed, it isn't. So there are things that impact the employer directly because of mental health issues, personnel issues, different things like that trickle down from something that could easily not necessarily easily, but at least have been acknowledged. You might be able to guide the employee as to what resources are available, whether it's our EAP or it's health benefits offerings, things helping them navigate that might keep someone in a job so that they don't quit, so that you don't have to replace them. So there's tangible dollar amounts you can connect to acknowledging mental health issues and taking steps to address them. And employee morale.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on top of that, usually these, mental health issues are episodic. Is that a word? Whatever. They last for a duration of time. It's not an issue with the employee per se. It's just a point in time that just needs a little bit of help, just like a cold or something. I mean, you wouldn't fire somebody or exit the organization if they had the flu. They go to the doctor, they get what they need, and it's very similar here. So just to kind of piggyback on what Shannon said, you don't want to get rid of a good employee if there is something that you can do to support them, like the things that she just mentioned.
The grass is not always greener on the other side. There is a monetary amount associated with turnover, and that could potentially be detrimental to your business. So, and just because you got rid of the employee with the cold, like Sandra was saying, doesn't mean the new employee that you're hiring is going to be any better. They might have the flu. I don't know. That was maybe a bad example considering we just went through COVID and the comparison with the flu. Okay, I'm on mute now.
I also think I've been in situations where one employee is performing poorly, and because of that, everyone around them is performing poorly because the one task they have to complete feeds into the tasks others have to complete. And in that scenario, like one conversation with the employee ended up being this big data dump, and rectifying that one issue meant, it's like an assembly line, meant the assembly line as a whole was able to produce more efficiently and effectively, because prior we weren't able to necessarily deduce where all the performance issues may have been. Everyone was getting a little bit of the blame in theory. So it just one conversation and then some action items after that one conversation and some check-ins after that one conversation rectified an entire scenario where an entire department was performing poorly.
Yeah.
It's good.
So we know that COVID really changed the workplace, and we talk a lot about being in the workplace and return to work, but there's also a large portion of the workforce that will remain remote. So how are employers how can they engage with those remote employers and support them in a remote environment?
We do it.
Yeah.
Don't forget about them.
Yeah.
It's not the out of sight, out of mind thing. Make sure that people want to interact. Most people do. Okay, so I have to throw out my coffee break thing here. Just because it's amazing the difference working in an office and working fully remote, where you would just pass somebody in the hall and say, hey, how did your child's dance recital go? Or did you enjoy, X new restaurant that you guys were going to? And all of that's lost now being remote. So you need to be intentional to do that same thing, even when you just do touch points with people during the week, or set aside 10 minutes that you're just going to grab a cup of coffee and hop on to some type of a FaceTime, Zoom, whatever, and just sit and chat. No work stuff allowed, just chat so that you continue to build those relationships. Anyway, sorry, it's my 2-cent commercial.
I also think it's so important to acknowledge the fact that if I'm working from home, I'm going to run a periodic errand during the day. Like I'm just going to, and that's okay as long as I'm getting my job done and working the hours that need worked. And so to prohibit yourself from micromanaging because the scenario is different. And I've used this example before, you know, my husband's boss, they do walking meetings where he walks around the block and that is their meeting. So he doesn't have a notepad in front of him and he can't take notes, but they both acknowledge this, and it makes sure that person gets fresh air, make sure they're not stuck at a desk that may not be in an actual office, maybe in our case, the laundry room. So I think you just have to avoid micromanaging. It's just a different scenario. I'm going to run to UPS today, Deanna.
Okay. I had training at 8 o'clock. So I just got here from my training. Like that's, I think, you know, well, in a remote environment for us as individuals in a remote environment, it's probably easier for us to be able to run those personal errands and do those things that we want to do throughout the day. It might be harder, I would think, that if you were in an office and, you know, you're kind of, I hate to get used to this word, but sucked into you know, all that day to day, it's harder to be like, oh, I'm going to run out and do this real quick. I'm going to run, because then you feel like, oh, I got to get back to the office. But not that there's anything, you know, necessarily wrong with a full office environment. People did it before and they're going to go back to it. But I think more there just needs to be flexibility. But we've all seen it with some of our clients where they may say it, but they don't practice it. So it just like people who offer PTO, which also plays into people's mental health, they have to have a break. If you're not going to encourage and support people taking their time off, then don't even bother offering it, because then that just makes it worse. So it's in both environments, remote, in office, hybrid, it's up to the leaders, the managers, and the business owners to provide an environment that is supportive and flexible. Hopefully I do that for you guys. And if I don't, you need to tell me.
That's good.
All right, Sandra, this is directly. Absolutely.
Not your first week.
And
He froze.
Can't do it as good as Robert. I can't do the freeze. Oh, I need to practice.
and we know, and for everyone who's not familiar, Sandra is our recruiter extraordinaire.
Yeah.
So much pressure when you guys say that.
Magic maker. That's what I'm
Yes.
calling her.
Absolutely.
Stresses me out.
Absolutely.
Catch the anxiety all up in here. Go ahead, carry on.
But for those who are conducting interviews,
Mhm.
let's talk about that legally. So they're trying to hire, they're trying to bring people into the workplace. You know, what can they ask, or legally, can they even ask about like mental health and in interviews or anything?
I mean, I would not suggest talking about health right up front. I mean, we can't even ask like, do you have a vaccination or not? Right? I would not recommend that you talk about, hey, what's your mental health status? Are you seeing a psychiatrist? Are you on any medications? No, I would not. If you're looking for particular characteristics, whether it be resiliency or coping with stress, I mean, there are ways to ask those just from a personality trait perspective where it's not so attached to any type of specific health condition, would be the route that I would suggest anybody in an interview process to take, regardless if it's, you know, in a pandemic or not. What's going to be important to your work environment, what has been successful, and then based on that, ask questions that are appropriate and relatable. If you're liking this content, guys, go ahead and press that like button right underneath the video. Like, subscribe for more bombs.
You want to
like
hear
that.
Sandra's magic? Hit the like button.
Hit that like button.
I think Candace unmuted, so have at it. I saw you unmute. Did you have a comment?
You did look like you were ready to talk.
I had been coughing. That was the only reason I muted.
Darn
If
it.
you like this content, go ahead and smash that button again.
I always like the question that kind of connects, Sandra, to what you were talking about. How are you best managed, or what role do you play in a group? Because that shouldn't determine, but it's useful information.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, just like any other disability related inquiry in the interview process. You can't do that, whether physical, mental, or, you know, whatever the case may be. But it's interesting, and Robert, I might be stealing a question that you have later on your list, but we have seen, not in the interview process or the recruiting process, but we have seen a handful of clients over the last year that have managed through employee disability situations due to mental health versus physical health. And it's completely different. And so they're not really sure how to handle that. And it 9 times out of 10 starts out with us getting a call going, you know, so-and-so has been really great for the last 2 years. And now all of a sudden they're crashing and burning. And then they're like, we need to get rid of them. And then we go, no, don't do that. Let's talk about it and figure out what went wrong. And what we have been finding is the stressors and all of the stuff that we had talked about up to right now is impacting them. And so we need to figure out, how do we help? And part of that is, you know, we've had, like I said, we've had a couple of clients where, you know, we've gone through the ADA interactive process to find accommodations for people working through their mental health situations so that we can be supportive and retain them and get them back to work and get them healthy. That's happening a lot. And it's different because it's harder to come up with an accommodation, again, for something that you might not be able to see. You know, you can accommodate, well, it seems easier to accommodate a broken leg for somebody in a certain type of work environment versus maybe accommodating anxiety or depression in a work environment. So it has to be very interactive.
I've had an employee in the past ask for accommodation, so proactively bring it to the table. So hadn't had performance issues necessarily. So then there's the questions around documentation. How do you document? How do you store that document? To what extent can you accommodate? If you're accommodating and it's, for example, a reduced schedule, what can you do in lieu of those hours that the employee had worked prior? So there's you know, the angle that you see a performance issue and could possibly connect it to mental health. And then there's the angle where the employee proactively tells you they're having a mental health issue. And then what role do you play in accommodating the individual under that scenario as well? That's where we come in.
Just to kind of piggyback off of that a bit, what are some of the things, what are some of the signs or maybe changes in behavior, anything that they might notice, something that might be observed by a coworker or an employer that might suggest that maybe there's a need for support? What are some of the things that you're seeing?
So I would say, so someone who has changes in like coming to work. So a lot of folks, when they are experiencing some mental health issue, may start to call in more often, more short notice. They may not be as reliable as they used to. So you might have scheduled meetings where they may be late for, or they don't show up at all. Communication may take a hit. Where someone might be very outgoing and engaging, they're more inward. They don't really stop by to have those conversations, or they're not coming to the coffee breaks on a regular basis, or they're not engaging with what's around them, and they are pulling away, would be big sign.
Yeah, you can also see it in a decrease in work productivity, either volume or quality, maybe irritable, angry when they didn't used to be that way. The signs are usually there well before people start putting all of that together and realizing what it is. And sometimes other people see it before the employee even knows that maybe they're experiencing some mental distress.
They might be using their colleagues as counselors, and you might be hearing more personal talk and in the workplace, if they're in the workplace. And, you know, as opposed to getting mad about the fact that they're talking about their personal life excessively, that might be a trigger for you to, you know, understand that maybe they have some mental health issues or some things happening in their life that might create them to not be able to perform well. Right, Deanna?
Jessica just has dealing that currently with a client.
Right now.
It happens. These are real life examples, people.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Too, with mental health, sometimes there's a stigma attached to it, and that doesn't need to be there. You know, this is what we should be doing anyway, right? We're people all existing together. So helping people, that's really what we're doing here. Mental health doesn't have to be something that's, you know, like a terminal illness that they'll never recover from. A lot of people just need like some counsel or guidance or reshifting of their focus, and then they go back to being great productive employees. So it's not a taboo subject. It's something that everybody deals with at some point.
Yeah, most Americans are dealing with it, whether they are getting help for it or not. So like you said, it's not something to be, diminished. We never tell somebody with a heart condition not to go to the cardiologist. And yet we may tell someone that has a chemical condition with their brain to not do anything about it, to not go get medicine, to not go to a doctor that specializes in that.
Just
so we
suck
really,
it up, right?
yeah, right.
Get over
right.
it.
Just get over it.
Right, like it's an organ that doesn't need to function. The brain has capacity to do amazing things, and we have to give it what it needs to function properly, just like the heart. So we really do have to be careful about treating mental illness like it's some other kind of disease. It's really like any other dysfunction of our body.
Yeah.
And understanding all of the, unfortunately, some of the stigmas around mental health, what are some ways that employers can effectively start the conversation, or at least, at least create the culture and communicate that there's a culture where, there's help, or we can have conversations, or the door is open to, to ask for help. How can employers do that?
I mean, I've always been a fan of EAPs, employee assistance programs, for people that don't know what an EAP is. And they've primarily been so focused on large companies, but we know that we have an offering for small businesses. Not that, we're trying to make a sale, but we want people to know that it is such a low cost, high value benefit that you can provide employees. And that is the very first step in showing a sign that you support their total wellness and their mental health. And then outside of that, it's, part of those check-ins that we were talking about, and having conversation with them, and asking them, how are they feeling? Maybe not just, oh, how's it going? Hey, how you doing? What's happening here? But how are you feeling? How are things working in this way? Just having more intentional conversations and letting people talk and just being there to listen, I think.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. It's amazing what is sincere. How are you? How's your family? How have you been dealing with the last year and a half? It's amazing how much information you can get from someone with a sincere question. So just making that our practice to ask, how are you? And really waiting for people to give an answer versus just, oh, that's great, and keeping it moving. Will give people an opportunity to feel safe so that they can speak up when there really is a concern.
In this virtual space, when you have that quick meeting, instead of getting right to business, asking a quick question, how are you? How are, a question specific to whoever you're meeting with. I know I fall short there because sometimes I just want to be aware of other people's time. And so I feel like I'm wasting their time, but I think that a question about that person's well-being can go a long way.
I think that'll just be a natural shift in the work environment, hopefully, that we'll see because of the pandemic, is that a lot of conversations you feel like when you have at work, in the office, or wherever it is, does need to be work related. But it is okay to have conversations. I mean, you don't want to sit there for like an hour, or whatever it is, impeding business, but having conversations here and there that are open and are personal can be very beneficial.
I mean, otherwise we wouldn't know where to get the best pie and cookies, right, Sandra?
True.
Yeah.
Next, you stay tuned for the next show of whatever.
You need a cake shop. You've got cookies and pie. Apparently we need
Yeah.
a cake shop.
Yeah.
All
I'll
right.
look into that.
She's on it. She's on it.
Well, this has been an awesome conversation, and a conversation that we hope continues not only in June, but all throughout the year and ongoing in the workplace. It's necessary. We need to support each other and understand everyone benefits from that. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. If you have questions or if you want suggestions or recommendations, our EA team is here to support you. Otherwise, we hope you enjoyed the episode and hope you have a great rest of your week.